thanks so much for having me. And yeah, one of the things I want to talk about this afternoon is sort of this interesting interplay between the incredible economic power of coastal tourism and recreation and the coastal conservation movement that's trying to protect those places. And traditionally, those two things have sort of been at odds, and I want to talk about how they, why they shouldn't be. This is a famous quote from David Brower, one of the founders of the Sierra Club, and there's no business to be done on a dead planet. And it's been a theme of this conference, and it's really funny when you think about it. There's been this juxtaposition always. Is it the environment or is it the economy? And we have to make these choices. And I think one of the themes of this conference and one of the things we're learning is actually that's not a juxtaposition. You can't have a healthy economy without a healthy planet, and you can see that at play on our coastlines up and down California and around the world. I mean, this is the arguably sort of what drives every coastal community in Southern California and the state is coastal beach going and tourism. When I was a 16-year-old first-time lifeguard in Laguna Beach, the first thing they do in the training is they teach you, hey, guess what? You can't be anti-tourist anymore. We were little beach brats who complained about the tourists, but those tourists are the ones who are paying your salary. They're why the city of Laguna Beach has any income, and if every business in Laguna Beach is ultimately dependent on those tourists, and that's true in every coastal community up and down the state. And there's data to back that up. I don't know if you can read the bottom of this slide, but it's looking at the different employment sort of sectors in the ocean and coastal economy in the state of California. And the one that dwarfs everything else is coastal tourism and recreation. The gray bar is California, the red bar is the country. So what's true here is true everywhere. So construction, living resources, minerals, shipping and boat building, transportation, all of those things pale in comparison to coastal tourism and recreation. And it drives in a huge amount of our economy. So 150 million beach visits to California beaches every year in this state. And those coastal visitors spend $15 billion pumping that into our coastal economy. So it's obviously really important. And if you look at fishing, tourism, and recreation, it's responsible for 660,000 jobs in California and about $43 billion in GDP. New stats from Oceana. Thank you, Nancy Hastings. So, obviously it's an incredibly important part of our coastal economy here. And in fact, and we also know this, and we'll talk about this when I have my panelists come up, the difference between living on that house in the second or third row from the coast and the first row, can be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. This is the Hook in Santa Cruz. And in fact, there's a study by a guy named Jason Scorse, an economist in Monterey, that if your house is near a surf spot in Santa Cruz, it's actually worth an extra $100,000. So just showing the sort of the power of the ocean and our attraction to it and how it drives those economic values that we care about. Unfortunately, we're also loving that to death, and I'll talk about that in a second. All it takes is clean water and healthy beaches, right? We need the oceans to be clean. We need our beaches to be healthy, and if we can keep it that way, this coastal tourism economy will generate itself. It's a regenerative sort of source of income, and it'll just keep going and keep going. That said, our relationship with the coast is really complicated. We love it to death. We want to get as close to it as possible and have that whitewater view out of our kitchen. Masses of people come to our beaches day in and day out, and they bring their litter and trash. And so it's also creating a lot of that pressure, that development pressure is also creating obviously a lot of challenges on our coastline. Sea levels are rising. Sea levels have risen about 8 inches in the last 100 years, and it's already caused the challenges we have. It's supposed to rise 3 feet to 6 feet in the next 100 years. So that's going to fundamentally rearrange our relationship to the coast. This is a king tide, extra high tide in La Jolla from last year, obviously causing some challenges to that coastal development. Plastic pollution, which we've heard a lot about, is another thing. We litter our beaches when we come down to the beaches as tourists, and we're dumping plastics, which has been a theme here. Coastal erosion. This is Pacifica, up in just south of San Francisco, where coastal erosion is starting to impact development. They're having to tear down houses and move them back from the coast. That's definitely not what we want our beaches to look like, and that's not the home you want to have to live in or try to sell. And then oil spills. This is the American Trader oil spill that happened in 1990 right off Huntington Beach. You can see on that map the area. That's the Newport River jetties, and it oiled the coast there. This cost about $35 million to clean up. It closed the beaches in Huntington Beach for 3 weeks in March of 1990. A number of little local businesses on Main Street in Huntington Beach, which is thriving today, went out of business as a result of that spill. Unfortunately, this is a threat that we're facing again off the California coast with plans to drill. So on one hand, it's this incredible economic driver for our coastal tourism businesses. It's a place we love to play. And on the other hand, we're not really treating it like the valuable asset and resource that it is. And it's easy as an environmentalist, and we heard some of this earlier about the ocean-friendly restaurants and other programs. It's easy for us to kind of sit back in our sort of holier-than-thou attitude and say, you should do this, you should do that. It's easy, but there's also economic forces that are driving all of these different issues. And so what I wanted to do is bring a couple people up to the stage who actually care about these issues as much as I do, but are also challenged with the practical reality of running a business, and talk to them about how they make those choices. What do we value, who benefits, and who's responsible for the impacts and for the solutions. So with that, I'd love to invite my two guest panelists up to the stage. I think they might be backstage. John Moyer, he grew up in Huntington Beach and was a proud member of the Huntington Beach High School surf team. He had a brief stint on the ASP World Qualifying Series, pre-WSL. He studied business and finance at Cal State Long Beach, and shortly after graduating, he entered a real estate investment industry. Through his 15-year career, which includes lending, acquisitions, development, asset management, he's been involved in projects that total more than $2 billion. He currently oversees a large commercial portfolio in a charming beachside community in Hawaii as the director of asset management for a real estate investment trust. So he's got the real estate perspective, which is really great. And Kurt Bjorkman has been involved in the hospitality industry since 1987, working at resorts ranging from 68 to 3,000 rooms. For the past 8 years, Kurt has been the general manager of the Ranch in Laguna Beach, which is a beautiful seaside resort and a National Geographic unique lodge of the world. I think he's got the pin on to prove it. And he's a native Californian, hailing originally from Berkeley. He and his wife and his two kids live in Dana Point, about a mile away from the waves. So these are two guys that obviously love the coast and are both running really interesting businesses that are coastal dependent. So we're gonna sit down and have a little chat about protecting the coastal environment and being a successful businessman. So thanks, you guys, welcome.
Thank you.
So Kurt, as someone who's lived on the coast and has been a leader in the hospitality industry, tell us a little bit about sort of, why you care about the coastline, and then sort of how you've taken this love for the coast and really embedded. I mean, the Ranch and the Harvest, the restaurant you're running, have done some pretty remarkable things to, be good stewards of the environment. And maybe you can tell us what those are and sort of why you did them and what the costs and sacrifices were to do those things.
Yeah, sure. An honor to be here. Thanks, and meet all of you. I mean, who doesn't love the ocean? The hat says it all, vote the ocean, right? I've proudly got mine in the back. Thank you. But it's kind of a no-brainer that you got to take care of the ocean. Growing up in California and being in the water my whole life, whether it was surfing or snorkeling or sailing, it just kind of was in my DNA. And I think I was fortunate in that manner. Not everybody is, and I think that's a big challenge, is people who aren't part of it every day maybe don't understand it, and it's not in your blood, so to speak. But being in an environment business-wise on the coast is fantastic as well. And I can't imagine, I've worked in Las Vegas and Florida and Orlando and all these different places. This is kind of my bucket list property. I'm never leaving. But it's 87 acres in a protected canyon with a very beautiful stream that starts in the Santiago Peak, kind of Trabuco Canyon area, and it empties out at Aliso Beach. So it's a very amazing environmental area. I've learned more in this 8 years than I ever thought I ever would about land management, about coastal law development. But at the end of the day, the most important thing for me and my team is just how do we take care of this place the way it should be without falling into hype or over-marketing our efforts, just doing the right thing. And sometimes that means waiting, and sometimes that means going really fast and just hoping it works. The restaurant we have is, an ocean-friendly restaurant with the Surfrider Foundation, and we're super proud of that. Platinum, yeah. Removing straws from the restaurant was an easy thing for us, and we get zero pushback from our guests. But 500 million straws a day in the United States, are you kidding? And we can just have a little part of the solution there. We found a machine that takes all of our glass, and because what I didn't know about glass is very little glass that you send out to the recycle bin actually gets recycled. And I didn't know that. I thought it all got recycled and it's all feel good. Oh, look, it's got the recycled thing on it. I'm set. That's just not the case, as you know, way better than I do. But so we crush all our bottles into sand. And the term regenerative, to me, really struck a chord, because we're using that sand in our bunkers, in our golf course. Because, again, as you go along this journey of trying to figure out what's working, what's not, you start to learn things. Sand is an incredibly underreported, diminishing resource, because the best sand comes from the beaches. A lot of beaches are disappearing because of many different reasons, but one of them is we take it and we use it. It takes like 200 tons of sand to build a house. So my little hotel, 97 rooms, a restaurant, all just from the glass bottles I have in my guest rooms of bottled water. Our guests, you can't not give your guests what they want, but you need to give it to them in the most responsible way you can. So we don't do plastic in the rooms. That's ridiculous. And we weren't going to do any water in the rooms until we figured out a way to do it responsibly. So we get water from not California, but a sustainable source back east. We use Mountain Valley spring water, which is great, by the way. Not a plug, but but we take those bottles, just the rooms alone, not counting banquets and restaurant and the various other people who bring bottles on. I'm going to put about 11 tons of sand into my bunkers just on those glass bottles. That's about 20 or 50,000 bottles a year. There's 200 grams of sand per bottle, and that's just a normal size bottle. But we do that with all our wine bottles and liquor bottles. The best bottles are tequila bottles, but so if you play golf at my resort, you might smell a little rum, but it's all good.
And so do you think your customers notice these things and care? Is that a competitive advantage? And are you willing to spend a little extra money to do these things because they're the right thing to do, or are you doing them because you see a market advantage?
It's interesting. I think several years ago you needed to do it to market yourself and being progressive. It's almost you have to now. It's like if you're not, it's like
a given.
Yeah, it's like driving down the street and seeing a hotel that still advertises we have color TVs. It's like it's like if we don't recycle and do things at a minimal, doing things the right way with recycling and trying to be conservative with using resources, that's just getting on a playing field. Everything else is gravy, and we personally choose not to overmarket that. We don't want to use it. We certainly talk about it. We want people to know about it because it's a learning tool, but we're not out there dangling it, because the minute you start bragging, things crash down, because something sometimes doesn't always work. We had a good example is we were really looking at a system that composts all our wet food waste, because you can't put wet food waste in the dumpsters anymore. It's a great law, but what do you do with it? So, several of the waste management companies are good at handling that for you. We personally try to use as much of it on our property for composting. Got a lot of worms and learning a lot about that as well. But these systems that said they'll take all your protein wet food waste that you can't necessarily put in a compost bin commercially, and it'll turn it into this sludge and you can flush it into the sewer system. Sounds great, eliminate 100% of your wet food waste going to the landfill, but one phone call to the water district, and it was like, yeah, no, we can't handle that. We'd love to, but we don't have that digester to be able to handle the grease in that. So we couldn't do that. But there's other solutions. So you don't want to jump on the bandwagon of everything that is presented to you. You need to look at it carefully and do it correctly, and then just make that part of your ethos of your business.
Yep. No, it's great. It sounds like this experimentation and progress has definitely been a theme of the day. And,
Oh, yeah.
so cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
And John, you grew up surfing competitively. You spent your time between California and Hawaii. It sounds pretty good. And you've been involved in coastal real estate for a long time. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about sort of what, we all know that coastal real estate is desirable, but maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what that means to you and sort of, how that affects your business and if the quality of the coast matters.
Well, first, thanks very much for this opportunity. Great to be here. It's a privilege to be here. The ocean means everything to me. As Chad was saying, I grew up surfing. I was blessed to have that in my life in Huntington Beach, riding down to the beach every single morning before school to surf, riding my bike back to school, riding back after school to go surf, and just that lifestyle of growing up near the coast. And my wife jokingly says, I never knew what it would be like to be married to a surfer. And she happens to be here today, too, so I can sort of make fun of her about this. But she said, I never knew what it would be like to be married to a surfer and just someone who just loves it so much. I just, I don't get it. But, we now have a 7-month-old and a 20-month-old, and we desire to have them grow up in that same environment to get the same joy that I experienced. But getting to kind of the business side of things, I meant in the intro was that I oversee a portfolio in Oahu in a charming beachside community. That town is called Kailua. It's on the east side of Oahu, and the beaches there are world famous and they're world class. And there's a heavy tourism component. Obviously, the economy in Hawaii is virtually dependent on tourism. And everybody is impacted by tourism in one way, shape, or form, even if you don't work in the hospitality industry or another industry that is directly related to tourism. And so that's a key driver. If the oceans in Hawaii suddenly became unhealthy, whether it was because of an accident, an act of God, a hurricane, or whatever happened, the state experiences a major impact. And so just the economic impact alone of those tenants in that charming beach town in Kailua, it's about $250 million, and that's just from the community, on what the community spends in those retailers every year. And so you add on what the tourism component brings, and you can tell that it's magnified. And so it is obviously critical that the ocean remains healthy, particularly in Hawaii. And Hawaii is a really good example for that just because of the tourism component. But you're seeing it elsewhere, I think, that in other markets, I was actually reading an article recently where the ocean now is on the East Coast in certain areas, is the sea level's rising so much that oceanfront property values are declining. So for the last 10 years, which if you think back to 10 years ago, that's when the economy was sliding off of the cliff, and real estate basically was just completely battered. And in some cases, that still hasn't recovered. But oceanfront properties in this area of Florida have actually gone down between then and now by 7.5%. If you look at comparable non-oceanfront properties over that same period, and granted most areas have recovered, at least to see some growth from that point in time, the non-oceanfront properties are up 30%. So there's clearly an impact that I think you see when an ocean is unhealthy. And in some cases, you have people that acquired oceanfront homes a long time ago. They bought them for prices that we would never see today, thinking I'm going to own this thing forever. And for the most part, real estate long-term is low risk. Short-term, it's much riskier. But a lot of those families are going to have trouble liquidating those properties. And so ocean health is absolutely critical to the business I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. I don't think that's widely, you widely understood that actually having oceanfront property could actually be a liability in the long term.
Absolutely.
That's pretty amazing. There are actually places where you see devaluation instead of
That's
increases.
Right.
So, Do you think that there's broad awareness of this sort of in your industry? You seem like someone who's pretty enlightened and obviously pretty in touch with the coast, but do you think this is something that's widely understood, or do you think it's pretty atypical?
I think, to be candid, in the real estate industry, it's lightly understood. And I think there needs to be more awareness. It doesn't have to be an oh my gosh kind of moment, we're all going down kind of thing. But it does need to be something that is more of a sustainable plan over the long term. The challenge with that is that in the development business, it's a very short-term horizon. And that's how returns and investments are made, and frankly, people profit in development. For legacy landowners, it's much easier to commit to sustainable practices in their business, much like Kurt was talking about, because they know they don't have to liquidate according to a 2, 3, or 4-year business plan that they're required to because of investors that they have on the side. So there's much less risk in them putting the effort forth and starting to invest in that process. And we've seen some good examples. In Hawaii, there's an area, basically the northeast side of the island. Some of you might be familiar where Chinaman's Hat is. And it's called Kualoa Ranch. And there's an old family that owns all of the land there that goes back into the valley. And there's a nonprofit company there called Huio Ko'olau that's restoring a watershed from the top of the Ko'olau mountain range that flows through Kualoa and actually down into Kaneohe Bay. And the Morgan family who owns that land, they're actually using that as an opportunity to educate everyone that visits their ranch, because they have horseback riding, they do weddings, they do corporate events, and a lot of their business is tourist. And they're actually educating tourists that come to see actually what this nonprofit is doing. And so the company I work for contributes and participates in that by sponsoring the nonprofit and providing that way. So there's opportunities, I think, in the real estate, but it definitely is, I think, at the very beginning.
Yeah, it's encouraging to hear that it's happening at all, so that's great. Do you think your tourists, the ones that are visiting the ranch, are sort of aware of some of the environmental issues that either you've already contended with because you're in this natural environment, or some of the things that are happening at Aliso Beach, which has had pollution challenges over the years? Do you think they're aware of those things, or what's your sense?
I do. I think the travelers today, obviously you have different demographics of travelers, but ocean-going travelers have a desire to hit the beach. And so a quality beach experience is what they're automatically expecting. They don't expect something to affect that in a negative way. The tools that we have now, one is right back there, is like, the app-based check the ocean tools are really cool. A lot of people use those, temperatures, waves, but also to see it's kind of sad. It's very telling, but it does go to the education of travelers. And I do this if I'm traveling to a beach to surf or I have 2 boys as well, 9 and 13, in the water literally right now, has there been a spill nearby? And to even have to ask that question is kind of sad, but the more people who understand that is the reality of where we're at in the coastal areas, I think is good awareness, because then they think about it when they go home and they're washing their car in their driveway, or throwing something down a storm drain that shouldn't go there. They think about it, that how that can affect their where they're living, whether it's a lake, a river, or an ocean. The water all ends up with all our stuff. But they are very aware, I believe.
When you're making decisions at your business about, you joined our ocean-friendly restaurant program, Platinum, which means they've met all the requirements and have really reduced their plastic usage. In some cases, some of the choices you've made probably cost you guys more money.
Oh yeah, sure.
And so thank you for that, obviously, and doing your part. And so as you make these different decisions, obviously you can't do everything at once.
Right.
So when you look at the costs and you know the right thing to do is more expensive than maybe sort of status quo. How do you make those decisions, and where do you draw the line, and sort of what's the process behind that to sort of incrementally improving sort of the sustainability or environmental responsibility of your business?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a little different for different types of ownership. As it was discussed, somebody who's in it for a 4 to 5 year return is going to see things differently. And it is interesting today that we have an asset manager and a hotel general manager sitting on the couch together talking about a common goal. We're not usually smiling in the same room. I think I would with you. But, you know, it's important, you know, that an organization have a vision on how this is going to work in their business. It has to make some financial sense because, you know, there have been businesses that have thrown the kitchen sink at everything environmental and they're not around very long, unfortunately, just because they don't always make a lot of financial sense. But if you're smart about it, if you block and tackle these ideas and really work on it, there's usually a way to recover those costs. So whereas a year ago, you know, a hotel might have had plastic bottles in the rooms and offering free water because their rates are $400. So they have a nice bottle of Fiji water in the guest room. It's really nice water, it tastes good. But the carbon footprint on that bottle is pretty phenomenal. And instead, why don't you charge your guest a few bucks for the water? They're used to that. In New York, they'll pay $8 for a small bottle of water anyway. So why not charge a couple dollars for a nice glass bottle and be able to then use that bottle to replenish the sand in your bunkers? And so, well, those aren't always that simple to connect those dots, but there's usually a solution somewhere. And some way to make it happen. So yeah, I think you just have to really walk through the entire process. I'm fortunate that it's a small business and it is not a you know, large investment pool that's looking at certain metrics to measure. Although a lot of companies are seeing the long-term benefits from that because, again, consumers are going to expect that. They're going to demand it, and pretty soon it's going to become untenable in the business environment, in the hotels and restaurants. If you're not doing that already, people are going to not want to travel and participate in that. And it's going to become more and more noticed if you're not attempting or trying or at least making a good effort to participate in this really important effort.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And earlier we heard another panel talking about restaurants in Santa Monica, and one of the dynamics I think is interesting is this push-pull, right? Is it the consumer who's sort of driving these choices, or are you guys sort of leading those choices? And, you know, it sounds to me like there's a little bit of a balance to be had there. But do you see yourselves as sort of responding to your guests, or do you think you're out in front of them oftentimes?
I hope we're out in front. I want to be out in front. I think if we try to only follow our guests, you know, they're on vacation, and so while they might be thinking about it, they're not really the ones I need to take the lead on. If they're telling me this is awful experience because you made me go through this, I understand the end result. We'll have a conversation about it. But we need to be in front of it because I have access, as do most in the hospitality industry, to the ideas, to conferences like this, to participate and learn and grow and make mistakes a lot faster than the consumer can tell me to do that.
Yep. No, that's great. And John, you talked a little bit about this sort of dynamic between short-term and long-term thinking in terms of real estate investment and returns. You know, sort of, do you think that the short-term cycle, these folks that are maybe focused on a cycle that's not going to be impacted by climate change, but are still wholly dependent on the coast and ocean, do you think that they are doing enough? Do they recognize that connection? Do they take it for granted, or do you think they should be contributing more to the general health, or are they doing that by paying taxes and other things that they do?
Well, I think to some extent there needs to be a mind shift still. You're never going to totally overcome the need to get a return on an investment for any given development project.
Yep.
But I think what's happening, at least what we're seeing in the industry, is that there at least is some acknowledgement that amenities like the coast, call it an amenity, add value to a project.
Yep.
And if that's not there, or protected, or carved out and preserved, then the values that you will achieve will be less than what you would with it there. And I think back to some examples where I was growing up, and the one that I think is most prominent in my mind is the Bolsa Chica Land Trust and the battle that occurred there. And I remember I think I was 14 at the time, or 13, around there. And my friend's mother was the chair of the board, and I would run around the neighborhood and put signs in yards, and I didn't really understand it then, but I was part of the cause, or part of it, and so I learned a lot through that. And then now it's funny being in real estate, I think back to that example a lot, because I like to think that, back then, the outcome from the developer's perspective was probably negative. But if you think about it long term with the community and how much of an amazing amenity the Bolsa Chica area is to those that everyone in Huntington Beach or North Huntington Beach or Seal Beach or Surfside, how much of an amenity the Bolsa Chica area is to that community, that adds value to those homes. And I think there's at least some acknowledgement starting to occur for things like that. And I think some companies are better at it. I think that others are going to be, like the private equity business, which is going to be very short-term oriented. There's probably not going to be a lot of commitment to sustainable activities there because the return expectations by the investors are so high. But those, like I said earlier, that if they have legacy lands, they have the balance sheet and the lending relationships to accommodate a longer-term perspective and horizon, so they're not getting beat up by some loan maturity event or other financial event that's going to completely wipe them out. I think you'll start to see a lot more commitment over the long term for places along the coast, particularly where the coast is really an amenity for the community. And that then also draws tourists to certain areas. A lot of the areas you mentioned, I think, the tourists that would come to Virginia Beach and you would hassle them and, they'd say, don't hassle them, that's your paycheck, and that kind of thing. And so, the tourists are a part of it and they want to come see places that are pristine, that are beautiful, and that are sort of innate and protected.
Yeah. No, that's great. Look over here and see much. Oh, we have 28 seconds left.
Plenty of time.
Maybe I'll take a question. Are you guys game for that?
Sure.
Right here.
A little bit offside of it. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and when I was growing up, the water quality was quite gross there, and now it's extraordinary. Why are the beaches here? And I thought it was a population thing, but Los Angeles is actually 1 million people behind Sydney, which surprised me as well. Why are the beaches here so disgusting?
Why are the beaches so disgusting? I can actually answer that. I mean, I think it's twofold. They're actually pretty clean when it's dry, when the weather's dry. From a water quality standpoint, they're pretty good. When it rains here, the water quality goes down really quickly, and that's because Los Angeles is one of the most paved places on the earth. So we've done, there's a lot of efforts, for example, to restore the LA River, but in general, it's just stormwater runoff. We've paved our watersheds. So it's everything we drop on the ground ends up in the ocean, after a rain. So we haven't done enough to solve the wet weather problem here.
But we had the stormwater issue, and I don't know what they did to fix it, but they did change it. So now the water's crystal clear. Why can't they do that in Los Angeles?
I mean, there's no question the solutions are there. It's also Los Angeles is so spread out, but it's just a matter of, cities like Santa Monica, which we heard about earlier, are actually, requiring more collection of water on site and properties. So it's just a matter of the political will and the money to solve the problem. Vipe, one more?
Yeah.
Sure.
I just have one question, and I'm just analyzing things. You're saying that you bring water from the East Coast over here. Why don't we just, simple, doesn't cost 0% carbon footprint, you use bottles that can be re-washed, that can be clogged. We have these beautiful old bottles. And why don't we use tap water? And if you don't have the right filter, I suggest you go to John Rose. He gives you a wasteful water filter that is good enough to go over, to third world countries.
Yeah. It's a good question, and let me answer it quickly, because that was one of our learning things. So, and I'll go quick, because I know
that's right.
negative time. But so we wanted to do a milk bottle delivery of water to guest rooms, because we've got great water in Orange County. Proud of our water program. We use reclaimed water at all of our entire properties. Reclaimed water on the golf course and the hotel grounds. It's wastewater that's been treated. It's not a gray water system, but it takes wastewater from the water treatment facility and treats it through a reverse osmosis system and delivers it to, the total dissolved solids are on most occasions less than 400, which is incredible. It's this close to drinking water. So that's taken over 30 million gallons of water of potable water that that golf course used to use years ago, now to zero. And we're reusing the water. But on the bottled water scenario, this is where you can get into trouble. There's a disease called Legionnaire's disease. Has everyone ever had Legionnaire's? It's a beautiful disease you don't want to get. But it's pretty prevalent in the hospitality industry because of the way they handle water. Water pitchers in banquets, water fountains, evaporative coolers that aren't cleaned very well. So imagine, so I've got great water stations all over my hotel for guests to fill up their own water bottles. We encourage that. We've got fill stations everywhere. We partner with a company called Flow Water. And in our restaurant, we serve filtered water, not bottled water. But in the guest rooms, it's a little different. So you have a filter system, you have bottles, and you have dishwashing. And that all sounds great until you realize you are 100% trusting one person to be a bottling station. So there's some legal issues with there. As soon as I put a cap on that bottle, I have to have a certain type of certification. But that's not something a hotel can easily get. It's not that easy. So, because it's called a HIPAA certification, and that's very difficult. I become a bottling plant, and introducing a bacteria, it takes one bottle to kill an entire room of people. Wow. And so that you have to consider those aspects. You have to be very careful because it sounds great until you put it into practical use. The other option we have, and we've done in some instances, is just no water in the room whatsoever. You use the tap water. But herein lies the issue where you have to balance what the guests are asking for against what you're gonna give them. So yeah, I don't give them straws, but if I don't have some sort of water in the room, I'm gonna get phone calls all day.
Well, we're going to wrap this up. You guys can chat about the bottled water system afterwards. But before I do that, I just want to give a real round of applause to John and Kurt. Thank you, guys.